Good afternoon. Welcome to EduSet Network. Friend, as you know, we have organized series of lecture on communication theory and research method. Yesterday we discussed the general characteristic of research method. Today we will talk about the dominant feature of communication theory. And for discussion on this very topic, we have in the studio Dr. Vishjit Das, eminent communication scholar, and presently he is director of Center for Media and Cultural Study, Jamia Misliya Islamia University. And Dr. Das has published several article, communication research article in different national and international journals, and actively participated in a national and international seminar on communication. So I hope his knowledge and experience will help us to understand the communication theory in a new perspective. So on your behalf, I welcome Dr. Vishjit Das for EduSet lecture on the topic dominant feature of communication theory. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Indeed, it's a pleasure to be here and also share with all of you and interact with all of you through this particular education satellite channel to reach to different parts of the country. And I'm going to speak today about communication theory. But before that, I would also like to demystify and clarify certain doubts when we talk about communication theory. Invariably, today, if you look at communication courses in this country, across the regions in this country, you find that there are different ways how courses have come up. And also, they have an element of theory which has been incorporated in their courses. I would like to submit that most of these courses have fallen short or even have a very myopic understanding about theory. First of all, let me clarify what is a theory. What is a theory? Why we call it a theory? And how a theory is different from models. I'm sure most of you as students of communication have studied more about models. So you read models like Shannon and Weber, Norbert Wiener, so many models you read. But can models be theory? That's another issue which comes up when we talk about then what is a theory? See, theory building is a very, very complicated exercise. In fact, what we say is that theory is nothing but a set of hypotheses, And what is a hypothesis? A hypothesis is a set of propositions. And what is a proposition? A proposition is a statement which can be proved either false or true. Now, when we talk about then theory, we know that before theory making or theory building exercise takes place, there are so many other processes which are involved saying about theory. Now, this is how we talk about theory. But if we look at media courses across the world, it started with journalism. Then it sort of tried to get into what we call mass communication. Then today we talk about different kinds of technologies of communication. So they have, over a period of time, broadened the larger debate and extended our understanding about theory. But however, when you say about theory, we must understand that communications have always existed since time immemorial. But rarely we made an attempt to theorize or even to present within a particular kind of a disciplinary framework to understand as theories. That's where the major problems is, because we as communication scholars and students of communications, we never engage with larger questions of modernity, and which is a very recent, you find that there is an attempt that we talk about. So we are, our communication as a discipline falls or lags behind in terms of contributing to theory. And this is where I would like to recast and also trying to present it in a form that where we try to bring communication at par with other sciences, that is social sciences and other disciplines. Now, there is a problem which has occurred in our own discipline, that is whether you talk about, because we have literally divided and horizontally built our discipline, where you talk about mass media, you print journalism, electronic journalism, the new media. You see, this is where we are trying to divide the field in a horizontal manner rather than raising vertically the question about communication and its relation with society. So now when we say communication, I would say that this is actually a work in progress. We have been all comfortable talking about journalism, mass media, but when we say communication, we are raising a larger questions that they all contribute for understanding communication dynamics in society. And this is where I would like to say that communication remain at best as a meta theory rather than a theory. But this is where we would like to borrow ideas from social sciences, and that is how they sort of try to understand society. Now, scholars have been engaged in understanding or trying to develop different typologies to understand communication or theories within existing theories within communications. So, broadly, I would like to map in terms of larger positions, and within that, I would like to talk about different subpositions within communications. And also, I will touch upon that most of our medium centric understanding, what we read as a textbooks, we find that they are actually inadequate to understand communications. They give you a sense of idea like a message passes from the source to the receiver through channel, like who says what to whom, then what Aristotle said, then we further talk about. I said that they are very, very reductionist in understanding communications. At best, scholars have tried to use Aristotle, but we are delinking that Aristotle actually talked in the context of rhetorics, not in terms of technology or media. But however, we have used Aristotle for our own convenience to say that who says what to whom, source, message, and receiver, like SMR. That is also subsequently in psychology and other disciplines, in learning theories, they have used called stimulus response, SR models. Then also Laswell further contributes by saying that it's not who says what to whom, it is who says in which channel to whom with what effect. So, this is where a little additions here and there, sort of trying to, these are actually models, they are not theories. Now, that's what I said, that a theory making is a much more complicated exercise rather than talking about models. So, I would here try to give you a different way of understanding theories, or broadly I call it as history of ideas. So that's what I would like to suggest, that when I talk about communications theory. So as I said, that it is actually the communication studies as a kind of a discipline is a work in progress. We are still struggling to evolve, develop as a how the field will emerge. Still, it remains as a field of inquiry rather than a theory or a discipline, because of so much, as I earlier mentioned about, that there is so much eruption within and disruptions. In fact, you find that as a result, we need to now more and more move towards trying to create a larger disciplinary structure. Or over the years, you find that communication has borrowed ideas from different disciplines like sociology, political science, history, economics, and so many other disciplines, even technology studies and so on. In fact, let's not forget that most of our communication models, which you study very often, that they have actually used various metaphors from military science, like you talk about hypodermic needle theories, you talk about bullet theories. These are not actually theories. It's a very, very commonsensical understanding, very naive understanding about theories. These were the initial developments which took place in the field. So people sort of try to give it a kind of a larger camouflage about theories, but they are not theories. Theory is something which has it has an universal application. Wherever you find that it does not fit in, you can find at best little limitations in the context, but theory, when you say a theory, it has a universal applicability. So that's what I said. The whole theory building exercise, in order to say a communication theory, and what the processes it undergoes in order to be called a theory or to qualify it as a theory, that once it is qualified, then it has a universal appeal. So let's not forget in that sense that most of the discussions we have in conventional media literature, you find they actually talk about model and they have a very naive understanding about theories. So this is where they talk about bullet theories and hypodermic needle, then some press Somebody is trying to understand press, we'll say normative theories. These are the initial assumptions. These are the initial scholars, those who are not well grounded in understanding social theories of media. They have been sort of trying to develop and evolve an understanding. In that sense, our understanding of theory is very weak. Now, when you say a theory, as I rightly pointed out, that whenever you say about theory, that we need to understand in terms of what you call the way it is understood in other social sciences. That how, in terms of public good, how we try to understand that they contribute. So, broadly, I will try to map and say that broadly we can understand the larger theories in the field in communications can be understood in terms of broadly two categories. One, we talk about the pluralistic theories or pluralistic position or the critical positions. Now, under pluralistic position itself, there might be different sub-positions. Similarly, within critical theory or critical position, I would like to say various sub-positions. Now, there are different ways to understand communications. One is probably, we would say, that within pluralistic theory, we find that we can again talk about effects. There is a whole generation of work from 50s till 70s. You find there is a massive contributions in terms of understanding that communication has an effect. So effect studies came up, and a lot of scholars in the early 70s and 60s contributed, from David Berler to Clapper, and so many scholars, they sort of tried to contribute to understand the effect. It's basically saying that communication has an effect. Communication has an effect, or you say communication has an impact in society. But the question arises, how do you measure that effect and impact? It's a very commonsensical understanding. And as a student of communication, probably I will be more interested in qualifying that statement by saying that how do I measure that effect? So a lot of studies have gone into analyzing that there are short-term effects, there are long-term effects, there are longitudinal, there are short-term. Then also the question comes of methodology, that what is the methodology to measure that? So whether it is the individual as the unit of analysis, or the diets as the unit of analysis, or the cliques. So there is an enormous studies which were developed in 60s, 70s. In fact, Stuart Hall, one of the leading scholar, who would say that till 70s, most of the studies or the theories in communications were behavioral in nature, and post 70s we find that there is a shift to ideological. So that is where I'm trying to say that if the earlier understanding of theory is more behavioral in nature, in the post 70s you find that there is a sense of understanding in terms of communication as an ideology. I think what Stuart Hall says very interestingly, that this is a what you call, in an Althuserian sense, that there is an epistemological break. For the first time, there is communication, something which we are trying to understand in terms of knowledge, and that is where we are trying to say that, look, now we are trying to understand communication more as a science. But prior to that, it was more about communication has an effect, how do we measure effect, and that is how we nurture the ideas about communication. It is in this context we see that there are a lot of scholars still struggling to understand that why is it that we are not sort of trying to able to critique, and now what is the basis? So broadly, if we try to map the various scholarship and the studies which have contributed to understand communication theory, broadly we can map by saying that, look, a section of scholars would say that, look, this is one, we try to understand in terms of how they are actually contributing to social order. The other sections would say that basically communication brings change in society. So now here broadly you can make two rubrics by saying that, one, communication talks about order, equilibrium, maintenance, harmony, balance. On the other hand, you talk about unanticipated consequences or change in society. So this is where broadly the field in communication can be divided by saying that whether communication is for legitimation or for critical self-reflection. So these are two central issues which we talk about. Now when you say communication for legitimation, and legitimation of what? For a ruling party, for a state, or for an authoritarian regime? That is how you would like to legitimize communication? Or you would like to talk about that communication brings change in society? So this is what the central idea which comes to our mind, that whenever we talk about communication. Now, I can use this particular distinction and reflect upon understanding the various scholarship in the field of communication by saying that probably one way to engage ourselves to understand this theory would be that the moment we bring another element, even though we talk about theory and method and making a distinction of theory and method, there's a total failure. In fact, you find that whole American scholarship and contribution, and in 80s, post-80s, there is a serious realization what they talk about ferment in the field, or even in the subsequent conference they talk about beyond polemics. Means there is a total ferment in the field. They are not even comfortable about the way communication trajectories, theory building exercise is emerging, and this is where more and more serious realization of theorizing and systematically studying communication is emerging in terms of certain theoretical principles. Now, this is in this context, I would like to say, the moment you bring the term power, that probably that can be a term alone to make a larger distinction to understand communications. If I look back to understand most of the effect studies like David Berlow, Joseph Clapper, there are so many scholars, those who contributed, they all tried to study effects, and this effect tradition also extended further what you talk about diffusion of innovations and so many others like Rogers and so on. They have all contributed to understand effects. Now, diffusion of innovation might be one step ahead of an effect, but this also, the central idea remains larger, and it's basically that people are there eagerly waiting or awaiting to receive your ideas. And it has an effect, no matter how the effects are. There is a very interesting article by Todd Chitlin, a scholar, a media scholar, media sociologist, called media. It's called media, the dominant paradigm, where interestingly he talks about that how this whole ideas of your bullet theory and hypodermic needle theories, it has a strong linkage with the Cold War and prior to the First World War thesis. Like when you say bullet theory, it has a connotation in terms of saying that, look, media or communication hits like a bullet. Communication hits like a bullet. Now imagine we live in a time when any country can hit the other country. Any country can send can attack, can intervene in other country. We lived in a times. So this is where the First World War. So that is the time that the idea is that the message is as important as powerful as a bullet. So this is where the idea of a bullet is coming up, that bullet theory. So I'm saying that we, as I earlier pointed out, that the metaphors from military science we have borrowed and that we have used. And the moment you talked about hypodermic needle theory, what Todd Chitlin says, that we are entering a phase of Cold War period. We are entering a phase of Cold War where mass media does not have any direct impact in society. It has a limited impact, or what you say, that it has a limited effect. Then it goes to interpersonal communication. So this says that it's like a Cold War. We have entered a Cold War. Cold War period means no country can directly attack another country. So it has to seek permission, it has to follow certain protocols. So this is how the context, that how our theorizing or building our theories have come. So in that sense, I say that it cannot be considered as theory, but what we broadly try to understand is posing probably in a larger context of pluralistic. I said that pluralistic position, where I would say that the moment I say about pluralism, I said about how in a society there are different kinds of checks and balances, there are equilibrium, and there are also different kinds of harmony, maintenance. That is how, what is the media, how media functions in society. Now, there are different ways to understand this. If I start with this idea that how television functions in society, there is one, probably a position would say that, look, television integrates society. It brings a national integration, a harmony, a maintained social order in society, a balances, strikes a balance in society. Then probably we are trying to understand that it actually has a functional value. It has a functional utility. So we are trying to understand from a functional point of view that how media is functional in society, how the function of media is useful for maintenance of society or bringing a social order in society. So that is where you talk about all the mass media, they function in a particular manner. So that is what we talk about functionalism. Initially I talked about effect studies. Subsequently, these effect studies have been extended, whether you talk about marketing, campaign, or even propaganda, or even diffusion. So you find that effect itself is a very vast tradition. So broadly, under pluralistic position, I would like to say about effect studies and talk about functionalism. Similarly, now when we talk about critical theory, you see critical theory itself, again critical theory itself, even though the term itself was given or attributed to what you call the Frankfurt School, which actually started as a counter reaction to Marxism in 1920s, or the certain Marxist ideas about society. But this is also the time when you find that Frankfurt School remained as a school of thought, but it couldn't move beyond to overall to contribute in theory building exercise. But there are eminent scholars of Frankfurt schools, so they were branded as critical. But there is another, before I come to more critical theory, I'd like to say that the whole continents were polarized. The whole continents were polarized in terms of such kind of understandings. One is either, if you read R.K. Merton, who talks about that it's actually the continents were divided. The continents were divided, like the Europeans, the Americans, and where Merton says that Americans are more pragmatic and the Europeans are more speculative. And this is where the fight began actually in 1930s and 40s, that they are administrative researchers and we are critical researchers. So you find till 60s, 70s, even 80s, you find most of the debates in the international context are that we are administrative researchers and they are critical researchers. So who's an administrative researchers? One who talks about theories of communication or uses communication research for the administrative requirements. In fact, Lajarsfeld, one of the most powerful contributor to communications. In fact, for your information, communication science actually enriched and grew along with scholars from different social sciences like Hobland, Lajarsfeld. There are so many scholars, those who came, and they actually contributed for the growth of communication as a discipline. And it is in that context I would like to say that the early years, there were a lot of attempts which were made to breach this too. There were a lot of attempts. Interestingly, if you recall 1920s, when a lot of Jewish intellectuals migrating to United States, all these Frankfurt schools, those were the propounder like Theodor Adorno, Horkheimer, and of course Habermas is the very, very youngest amongst all of them, and Walter Benjamin, or even Herbert Marcuse. There are so many, Erich Fromm. So they all migrated. They all migrated because they were all Jewish intellectuals, and this is where the idea came of, Frankfurt School, initiated by corn merchants in Frankfurt, and the idea was to understand what you call the trends of communications in European society. And Europe is undergoing a remarkable transformation. Look about 1920s, industrial revolution, post-industrial revolution, and Europe is in the pinnacles of growth. And there is also the time you find there's a massification of society. There's a massification of society, and that's what we call it mass culture, which is emerging in Europe. In fact, so much mass culture is emerging that now it has resulted in what you call fascism in Europe, in Germany especially, and that individual becomes a prisoner of his own consciousness, and even we say that we are imprisoned in the hands of technologies, media technologies. So all interpersonal interactions, everything is collapsing and getting gradually into mediated interactions. It is in that context they're saying that we are almost living in a mass society. So individuals are like atoms, dependent upon media to know about the outside world. And it is in that context mass society idea has come up in Europe. But interestingly, communication is an external form to link society. But already the European societies is so rich, or any civilizational societies are so rich, that culture is so important. So culture itself is communicative. Now when we say culture itself is communicative, here is this, that we talk about technology bringing communications in society, technology being an alien force. In fact, to give you little more twist, I would like to say that your whole understanding of communication is so technology savvy, or so technological deterministic, or we use a term technological determinism, as if prior to industrial revolution there was no communication in society. As we say, whenever we define communications or mass communications, we always talk about source from mass, from the source to the receiver, like we are always talking about technology in a manner that it's only communication through technology. Let me take you back to a dictionary. If you look at a dictionary and see that how communication is defined, or what is the meaning of communications, you find there are two paradoxical terms which are used in defining communications. One talks about or refers about transmission, and the other talks about sharing of ideas, beliefs. It means the first one talks about transmission of ideas. Now, how old is the history of the term transmission? I think the history of the term transmission goes back to only Industrial Revolution, 1770 to 1840. It means as if there was no communication prior to Industrial Revolution. You see, transmission as a term replaces another important term that is called transportation. Prior to Industrial Revolution, it was transportation. And in order to communicate, people were transporting themselves by land, by air, by water. But they themselves were moving from one place to the other. But along with the Industrial Revolution, like as a divine preacher says, now your thought can travel through steam and magnetic wires. You don't need to travel anymore. Your thought can travel. So that is a major contribution after Industrial Revolution. So let's not forget that our ideas about communications were much more rich and captured very well prior to even Industrial Revolution. So they all contribute. They all contribute to our understanding of theory of communication. In fact, most of you should have at least reading of Harold Innis. In fact, like The Bias of Communication. These are very, very important texts to understand about communication. They at least sort of try to get into a kind of a medium history and genealogy, that how the ideas germinated. And this is where we probably can contribute in a better way to understand about theories of communication. Not in terms of electronic, unilinear, one-way channel of communications, like radio and television. For your information, the term mass communication was never used in England till 70s and 80s. It was never used because they found that, as Raymond Williams says, one of the very, very leading pioneers, says that it is extremely, or what he calls, it is deeply and disastrously deformed. You see, when you say mass communication, you're only confining to a medium of communications. Like you talk about print, you talk about television, radio, and cinema. And he says the most important aspect of communication is speech. That you have completely neglected. It's like, it's not what Stuart Hall and other critics say, it's not who says what to whom. It's like who sells what information to whom, So that is how the market logic which came to understand communications. But communications, if you try to understand, it provides a very, very larger context. Now let me take you back to, I was talking about critical theory. I said that there is a larger umbrella to critical theory. There is a larger umbrella to critical theory. When we talk about critical theory, that there are so many kinds of scholars, activists, different kinds of positions, even though they do not agree with each other. However, they have all come together under the banner of critical theory and critical position. And broadly, I will try to demarcate in terms of saying one is a political economy and the other one is an ideology. So broadly, when we say critical theories, again you find, I will say that there is no such Marxist theory of media. There is no Marxist theory of media, simply because Marxism as a science grew and matured over the years, and it also were experimented in different parts of Europe and other parts of the world. And along with their local context, the way Marxism grew, they also tried to give us a new way of looking at communications. So this is where I would like to use different concepts which are used by the neo-Marxists. I call it the neo-Marxist, or you call it Marxian. So they have all contributed and enriched the field of communication theory. In fact, to begin with, I will start with the political economy positions. Also, I will give you an example. Taking television as an example, I'll give you an idea that when I say I'm trying to understand from a political economy angle, I'm mostly concerned about understanding television, that look, as Marx talks about political economy, that it is the base which determines superstructure. So television is a part of information and culture. So for the ruling class, it is not important at all. It's basically, it's a false consciousness. It's a kind of a false consciousness, or it remains in a superstructure. So this is where you find that it is not important. But the whole economy is most important to a political economist. So, but here we find that it is too dogmatic, and how through television we can create more false consciousness. That's the idea which came. But not all television messages create false consciousness. Not all television messages create false consciousness. So this is where we are trying to understand the messages of television. That look, there are good messages, there are bad messages. Now this is where messages become an ideology, and that ideology we are trying to understand. So that is what I would like to say, that we are trying to say about, or in other words, I can frame it in another way by saying text and culture, culture and text. I would say that look, culture becomes extremely problematic reading when you read it through television or even through medium. So you find that there is a very rich contribution which came up through ideology and ideological readings. So you find subsequently, if Marx only talks about exploitation, the subsequent scholars or generation of scholars referred about domination. You see, from exploitation, we are moving towards a term called domination. What is a domination? It is a domination at an ideational level, that how I dominate your mind. Like as mass society I referred, that there is a whole cultural appropriation, there is a domination in terms of who's imposing whose ideas. Then subsequently we talk about hegemony. That is a Gramscian context. In an Italian context, Gramsci conceptualized this term hegemony, that what you see in television is an ongoing struggle. and this is between the ruling class and the subalterns. So you find the messages which you see in television, who controls these messages, who actually um, evolves this whole editorial codes which you actually receive in television, and subsequently the way the programs are shown, you find these are hegemonic in nature, like different classes are shown, different identities are shown, and now how these juxtaposition of these identities, and also sometimes you can make an interesting hegemonic readings of these kind of messages. So this is where you find that different concepts can be used, borrowing ideas from Marxism to understand media. So this is where critical theories contributed immensely to understand, communication theory. However, uh, in the recent years, so broadly, I would like to quickly map that the way I understand when you say communication, I would like to broadly try to present to you a kind of a framework to understand theory. I call it that, look, we communication, since it is an interdisciplinary study, it has borrowed ideas from diverse disciplines. So we cannot now talk about any canonical understanding, or we call it a hype theory like in other social sciences they had. So we talk about in terms of that how we understand that what is a larger intellectual history of communications that has emerged over the years. I would like to say that I would like to sum it in terms of three different stages. I would like to say the first one, I would like to refer that communication as history of ideas. As history of ideas, when I say communication as history of ideas, I look at evolution of communications. Evolution of communications. When I look at evolutions of communications, I would suggest that if you want to understand communication as history of ideas, then we need to go back to understand in the early years that how communication evolved, even through circulation, or even through what you call trade and flows. Like we can borrow ideas from what you call our great economist who talks about division of labor and how the trades took place. It's not a mere trade. Along with the trade, there is a communication, a pattern of communications which is also existing. Let's not forget about that. So no transactions can take place without certain forms of communications. So in that sense, I would say that we have to refer communication as circulation. In fact, I would all recommend you to read Armand Matlat's Introduction to Communication. That is one of the most standard textbook published from SAIS. Don't read all those early 50s, 60s, those textbooks. It has rather damaged the whole discipline more and more. It has given a confined, a narrow, a rigid way to understand communication. Armand Matlat talks about communication as more in terms of that how these ideas comes that look circulation. In fact, this whole we go back to circulation. Somebody is trying to understand circulation the way our body blood circulation takes place in our body. Similarly, communication circulates in society. So this is, imagine one of the early jurists in 16th, 17th centuries writing about society and communications by studying like organism, the flow, the blood in the body, or even watching as a jurist, trying to watch the cases, trying to understand. So, similarly, lot of division of labor, Adam Smith, who talked about trades and flows. So a lot of work today we talk about understanding communication as a trade and transactions. Then we talk about information theory. You see, along with these ideas coming up, along with that in the United States in 1920s and 30s, you find that lot of, in fact, most of you should know that in Chicago itself, in 1920s and 30s, for the first time, they are building departments where they are trying to study communications. But communication as a discipline has not yet come up. But they are trying to study communities and communications in societies. Now, the relevance, the importance of studying communication in American context and others is a completely contrast. You see, think about 1920s American society. Everybody is a migrant coming together. And now they're trying to study that how through print, through newspaper, you can forge a sense of a community. That's the idea. So how mass media can forge a sense of a community feeling. Now imagine, because there was no community, because most of them are migrants settling down in America. But now you want to use media to bring them together and say that, look, we have a community. But see, in our context, we live in a society where community is inbuilt in society. So this is a difference when you say that media used for community. So this is in Chicago, you find on the one hand, scholars are trying to forge a sense of community through mass media. On the other hand, you find scientists like scholar who has talked about cybernetics, like Shannon and Weaver, Norbert Wiener. Norbert Wiener, who is basically a physicist, going to Oxford and Cambridge, gaining more philosophy and logic and other field, coming back and trying to develop missiles and technologies where there should be a sense of predictability. You know what is a cybernetics? Cybernetics is a science which refers to flow of informations within and outside the system. So why it is important to us? We are trying to study how much communication, information flow takes place inside and how much goes outside that can be measured and predicted. And that is where Norbert Wiener is developing. And one of his students is Shannon and Weber, sort of trying to use this model in telecommunications and talking about what you study about Shannon and Weber models. So these were models. They have been talking in a different context. They have been talking in a different context that how they are trying to evolve these different models of communications. So informations. Now, the moment you say information theory, in fact now communication, let's make a distinction between communication and information. Communication is a much broader term. Now when you say information, you are trying to measure, quantify the term communication. I mean, like bits of data and pieces of data. You are quantifying communications. So this is where you find that technology, they're sort of trying to explore possibilities of quantifying and measuring. Now, there are, as I said about culture industry, so these are other ideas that how it came, that how immediately we say that for the first time in 1920s, scholars are referring to the term culture. Now culture has been industrialized, commoditized and fetishized. That is how the Frankfurt School's contributions, and in that context they are talking about there is a mass society, and today we talk about popular culture. But this is also the time, along with 1950s, you find America championing the world and sort of ruling the roost, and also sort of trying to introduce disciplines across the world. And that is where we have borrowed mostly ideas from the whole American tradition of journalism, and which subsequently contributed. As a result, our understanding of theory becomes very weak in understanding communication studies. But in that context, you find that now, for the first time, we are trying to talk about that communication as a science is emerging now, which can be measured, which can be scientifically studied, and which can be qualified like any other disciplines. So this is also the time that we are now gradually trying to evolve as a discipline along with the professionals, along with the people coming and trying to establish communication as a science. So in order to qualify it as a science, we must first of all follow what in a conventional sense as scientific methods which we followed, that it should be verifiable, it should be empirically tested, it can be empirically grounded, and it is in that context we talk about on, and it ultimately resulted, it led to such an extent that almost we talk about scientism, that science for the sake of science, where a lot of went on using methods and tools. In fact, one of the leading Canadian scholar says the ecumenical nature of communication as a science. A very important scholar called Dallas Smith talks about that after exploitation of nature, the next target is to exploit human beings. So communication is emerging as a science of predictability. Communication is emerging as a science of predictability, that how much we can predict others' behavior. It is in that context we are talking about communication as a science. Now today we talk about that we have formulated technologies, we have developed technologies, and these technologies now govern our behavior. Like today, the advanced technologies like robo, I go and test myself whether I have drank alcohol or not, whether I should be given a driving license or not, because these technologies, after all, created by humans, now again conditioning human beings. So you find that how these technologies, the science it has come up, and I talked about effect studies. Then subsequently we talk about empathy. Empathy is that, along with, we find that Daniel Lerner in 50s did a project in Turkey called Modernization in Turkey. Subsequently, he wrote a book called Passing of a Traditional Society, and broadly identified few characteristics in order to say that whether we are modernized. Now, communication becomes a major point of entry, that the more access of informations and the more we are modernized. So this is how the early developmentalist theorists, those who emerged, talked about modernization theories, and they also contributed to communications. Then, as I mentioned about that communication as mode of production, that how communication contributed, we are using here mode of production as a conceptual tool to understand communication studies, and this is where also we are governed by certain Marxist theory and framework. Then we talked about, but besides all these, we have forgotten about, even there are different ways the anthropologists, or there are anthropological contributions to communications. In fact, the anthropological contributions are very rich, as I said about that, whether we try to study communication as a culture or communication is independent of culture. So if we say communication is culture, as I said, that societies have been, where civilizational societies, where communication has been a part and parcel of societies, they are, so we try to understand a culturalist interpretation of communication, but that culturalist interpretation evolved, and today, in fact, we talk about popular culture or cultural studies. So this is another dimension which has emerged today parallel to communication studies. So cultural studies are again a kind of an interdisciplinary. And finally, I would like to say about that most of these aspects what we study, we try to study communication theory within a framework of communication as a process. But not all. Now, whenever you say communication as a process, you always take it for granted that there are certain people, those who are speaking, others are there to listen or involved in the entire process of communication. But what about communications where you or me, we speak ourselves, we speak to the plants, we speak to the clouds, we speak to the tree, we speak to how does one understand that? So that is where we are shifting away from a processual understanding of communication theory to the meaning aspects of communication. And that is where we talk about semiotics. We talk about semiotics. Semiotics is actually nothing but science of studying the sign systems. Like in our day-to-day life, there are different sets of signs. And like, for instance, when you sit in front of your elder, you sit in a particular posture, you make particular kind of gesture, and you have socialized. You have been unconsciously imbibed these values from your home, your family, or from outside. So this is where you find there are different kinds of sign systems which exist in societies, and that is where we try to study, and that is where we find, like for instance, we say that a sign. I mean, we say that look, and this is where we talk about semiotics. Semiotics is a science of studying the sign systems. Like you see the calendar, you see the book, you read the book yourself, and when you read, you communicate with the book, you decode the meanings from the book, you go to watch a cinema, you watch a television, and even a silent era, you can see a movie, you can always decipher meanings out of it. So that is where we say you are no more an audience, you are no more a receiver, you are an active subject, or you call it that look, from an audience, now we call it that you are a reader. Like there is not much difference between the person who encodes and the person who decodes meaning from television. So television can be understood in different ways. You might look at me as an audience, or I can look at television as a reader. When you say that I'm reading television text, you are actively engaging in understanding the meanings associated with television programs. I think I will just leave it here so that we can have more discussions, and I can probably react to your responses. Thank you very much.
Well, sir, you talked about how the neo-Marxist helped to understand the communication, and you also emphasized to we should follow a cultural interpretation of communication. Only then we can understood the communication process, how it evolved, and we will be able to explain the things. So, but two things which comes to the mind. One, how could it be antagonized with the post-modernist approach, which talks about the new things which is coming to the fore, be explained in its own way or the new way. And if you take to the culture, they will term you as a traditionalist or some kind of obscurantist. So how will you explain such kind of phenomena?
Anyway, before I begin, I would like all of you to read a good book on postmodernism by Douglas Kellner. Douglas Kellner. It's an introductory, excellent book. You people should read. Now, you see, we are trying to now link about postmodernism. Now, before we get into postmodernism, we need to understand the very idea of modernity. The very idea of modernity. Then we talk about postmodernity.
Right.
Now, there is a larger scholarship still within communications where they disagree that the project of modernity is over. Like scholars like Habermas
Right.
would say that the promises which were made of modernity is yet to be fulfilled. But there is another set of scholars would say that look, the promises which were made by the modernist project could not be fulfilled. Probably this could be fulfilled in a different context, and that is still a void. See, beyond the modern and the postmodern, there is a void. Nobody knows what happens. In fact, Ulrich Beck is a very important social scientist. He says that post as a term is a term of sociological helplessness. That how everything we use a term as a prefix, as post, and trying to refer. It is in that context, when we talk about postmodernism, like let me go back to what are the basic promises made or proposed in modernity. It's probably basic rights, justice. What has happened in a postmodern context that all these are collapsed, these categories have collapsed. There's a collapse of sense and nonsense, or you call it there is a collapse of common sense and sense. There's a collapse of sex. We live in a unisexual world. There is a collapse of, because your entire imagination is reduced. It decenters. It dislocates you. It decenters you. Like I'll just give you an idea about who is a postmodern man. Let me give you an idea about a postmodern man. If I would have a postmodern man, how do I look at myself? If I'm a postmodern man, probably I would have thought about starting my Betty in one of the Las Vegas hotel, gone for a breakfast to London. After my breakfast, I would have gone to Paris for a business lunch. While having lunch, I will not be interested to listen about songs, but music of forks and knives, because I know that songs are very noisy. I will only listen the music of forks and knives. Afternoon, I go for a fox hunting to London from Paris. Went for a shopping to Harrods. In the evening, I go to Italy for an opera. In the night, I go to one of my Venetian island. Before I go to bed, I want to go and take a drive, bring out one of my snazzy cars and drive fast. Then I come back. Before I go to bed, I go to the bathroom to brush my teeth. When I stand in front of a mirror, I see nothing. In fact, a mirror sees another mirror. Think about, I said my entire itinerary. I started in Las Vegas, went to London for breakfast, went to Paris. Your entire, that is what I'm saying about decentering. That's what is a dislocation. You are no more grounded. Your feet is not grounded. That is what is, you talk about decentering of subjects.
Right. That is true, but what my concern is, where modernity explains the things, establishes cause effect relations, but postmodernism now they don't see in cause effects. They talk about empathy, emotion, other things which design the.
You see, the problem is modernity is based on experience. Modernity is based on experience. Let's not forget about it. There is a whole historical process which is involved.
Yeah, that is true, but sir,
subjectivity and experience, whereas modernity makes everything as a narrative. Everything, it's no more theory. It talks about narratives. So that is, so because you have not experienced, so your experience for me is just another way of narrativizing story. So what Marx experienced in 19th century capitalism is for a postmodernist will be, well, that's one way of explaining. But there is a solid ground to that experience. So how can you de-link experience from the context? So that's what I believe. But is it that something else you would like to talk about postmodernism?
No, it's correct, but we need more time for discussion on this, but we are having a scarcity of time. So we are not going to discuss. We will have another lecture for that. So, well, friends, as Vishit Das explained the communication process trajectory in a very lucid and very in simple terms, how could be seen and what the trajectory could be in coming days. So I hope this lecture have given us an insight to look into the communication theory and the communication model also. So I hope this is beneficial for all of us. So this part we conclude the lecture, and I thank all of you for watching the lecture. And on behalf, I thank Dr. Vishit Das for giving such an insightful lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you.